Hi, welcome to Hollywood. This is Josh.
And my name's Carter, and tonight we are going to cover something a little different than our normal movie critiquing business. We're going to still stay in the entertainment field, but we're going to talk about something that is very entertaining to both of us and hopefully everybody listening. We're going to cover a topic in professional wrestling that's been on our mind for about 10 years or longer.
It's basically the WCW ECW invasion of what was then WWF, now known as WWE.
Yeah, this was one of the greatest and worst things to ever happen to professional wrestling. Nothing had changed the scape of that field more so than in 2001, right around the time WrestleMania 17 happened, that Vince McMahon, in all his power and money, was able to buy WCW from the clutches of the Turner Organization. And in doing so, acquired raw talent pertaining to WCW. And along at the same time, ECW ran out of business, meaning Paul Heyman, for all his traits, really screwed up the books and they went under.
Basically, this is like when the AFL and the NFL merged. That's what we were hoping for, and it was pretty much that the NFL merged with like the CFL. It did not have a Super Bowl result.
No, it did not have a Super Bowl result, and I think it could have gone that way.
Oh, definitely.
And it had so much potential. So to give everybody a little backstory besides all that, right in the time the merger happened, we had a huge shift in WWE programming. WrestleMania 17 had just happened, touted by many to be the greatest WrestleMania of all time coming from a booking standpoint, because that show was booked solid front to back. There were no letdowns. There was nothing wrong with that show, but the big thing was Austin went heel.
Yeah, it was pretty much the climax of the Attitude Era.
Agreed. And right when that happened, The Rock was on, I can't remember if it was a month or 2 month hiatus to go film.
Oh, the Mummy Returns cameo where he's the Scorpion King.
Yeah, where he was the Scorpion King. So he was like gone for a month or 2 months.
Yeah, they tried to rise up because Austin, their top good guy, had gone bad. He started teaming up with Triple H, and then they tried to bring up new guys like Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho, but then Triple H and Chris Benoit both were hurt not too long after that.
That is true. So you're looking at a lot of talent roster that was missing, and the way the angle went on TV was that Vince was about to buy his rival, and it was going to be this big announcement, but lo and behold, his son, Shane McMahon, buys it out from under him.
Yeah, this is on the last Nitro, and they also aired it on Raw. So it's on two networks at once.
Yeah, first simulcast of either companies at the same time. You know, a huge moment. Things we growing up never thought we would see. I mean, we'd been surviving the Monday Night Wars for 6 years, going back and forth, seeing new talent rise and fall, seeing the worst of the WWE, and we're talking Rockabilly, Rocky Maivia, versus the height of WCW at that time, NWO, Cruiserweight division, a lot of special things going on there, and then you see the polar opposite shift and the Attitude Era in WWF emerge.
Austin 316, D-Generation X.
Mm-hmm. The rise of The Rock. So many. The rise of Mick Foley. Don't discount that. Triple H coming into his own after Shawn Michaels went home. And then you see the low of WCW happening in that time. Viagra on a pole match, Judy Bagwell on a forklift match. just the list goes on. The WCW blunders that were happening, and it's no wonder they went under because they had no leadership or direction.
And at the same time, AOL and Time Warner, they were merging. The new ownership, the new people rising to power, didn't want anything to do with pro wrestling.
None whatsoever. And
at the same time, WCW is losing money.
Yeah. And the great thing was Vince bought WCW for a song.
Yeah.
And he bought it, I think it was total, he was able to acquire licensing contracts and all video archives for $2.5 million. And when that word got caught out, there were a lot of people that were mad because they realized they could have bought it for that much.
Well, actually, they couldn't have, because when there was a lawsuit in 1996 when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came over from WWF to WCW, and they basically played the same characters. Vince McMahon sued them, and as a result, if WCW ever went to liquidation, WWF would have first rights to that, first bid.
Well, that actually makes a lot of sense. Which it was still a steal, though. I mean, that kind of video catalog alone was worth way more than anything. But when Shane came out and he's like, "I own it now," that's when you have to start the invasion angle. You have, Shane leading the charge, be like, "Dad, I'm not going to take it anymore. I have acquired WCW out from under you. It's now mine."
And initially, WCW was supposed to be its own brand. Remember when they went to split Raw and SmackDown?
Yeah.
Initially, that was supposed to be WWF and WCW, and they even did a WCW portion of Raw. That the main event was Booker T against Buff Bagwell. And then I think Arn Anderson was a commentator. I forget the other commentator. It escapes me. But they had their own referee, and they tried to do an offshoot of WCW, and it just tanked. It tanked hard.
And there's where, I mean, one of the biggest faults, and we can go to the beginning of this, when Vince made the buy.
Yeah.
Because when he went to buy, all major stars were still under contract. Now they had, one of two options. It's either, survive out their contract with what they're getting paid because AOL Time Warner still owed them that money.
Yeah,
or,
from my understanding, the minor talents were under WCW contract. The major talents like Hulk Hogan, Hall, Nash were actually under Time Warner contracts.
Which makes sense, and they could have, if they had so chosen, they could have nullified their contracts, something Time Warner would have been more than happy to oblige with.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, because they were like, these guys aren't making money, we're hemorrhaging money, but they were owed that money, so when the invasion angle happened, you had people come over from WCW, but they weren't mega stars. I mean, the biggest requirements they were able to jump ship immediately was DDP, and that's kind of it, actually.
The Booker T.
Booker T was there, but I don't consider him major in the annals of history. That's just my personal view. He was important, but not major, because when I'm talking major, Hall, Nash, Hogan, Sting, Goldberg, Flair, didn't come. So you're having a halfway invasion. You're sending in your B-list troops in order to invade.
Yeah. And Buff Bagwell was supposed to be, he was sadly one of the bigger names they got. He was terminated shortly thereafter, the Nitro on Raw incident.
So Nitro on Raw incident? I don't remember that.
When they had WCW, the match between Booker T and Buff Bagwell.
Mm-hmm.
Bagwell did not last at that company more than another week or two. I think he had some heat, and
he had a lot of heat with a lot of people. The heat he had was legendary. A lot of it had to do with he would no-show and have his mom call in.
Yeah, I remember Jim Ross, who was a head of talent. At one point, Buff Bagwell's mother called in and called sick for him.
And I mean, you just You don't do that.
No.
Like, first thing in any professional wrestling, you don't have any relative call in for you unless you are in a car wreck.
For any job whatsoever. You don't do that at McDonald's. Your mom doesn't call in.
Oh, I mean, that's just ridiculous. No man does that, but he's like a 30-some-year-old man calling Jim Ross, of all people, saying, hey, he's not making tape this week because he wants to sit at home and probably play Xbox or wax his chest, whatever Buff was doing. Or, prostitution, which he's doing now.
So of the talents they got, this is the list of talent that they required from WCW at the beginning. They got Billy Kidman, who I would say is a talented cruiserweight.
Yeah.
Booker T, who was probably one of the biggest names that they got. He was WCW champion and United States champion heading into WWF. They had Chronic, which was Bryan Adams and Brian Clark. They had Chavo Guerrero, who was the nephew of the late great Eddie Guerrero. Chris Kanyon, Chuck Palumbo, the before-mentioned Diamond Dallas Page, who was probably the biggest name I would say that they got. Hugh Morris, who is currently running NXT. Lance Storm, who's a very talented wrestler. Mark Jindrak, Mike Awesome, Shane Helms, Sean Stasiak, Sean O'Hare, Stacy Keibler, who had a very good run there, and Tori Wilson. And that's the ones that actually were on WWF television. There's a slew of guys that got sent to developmental, didn't quite make it. But that's missing a lot of huge names that they could have had.
Hey, you're absolutely right. There's, like, the big names, the big draws weren't there at all. And so you're running a halfway invasion. But didn't they realize that their invasion has no strength?
Yeah.
So lo and behold, Stephanie gets her own company. Stephanie buys ECW.
Correct.
And Paul E., in one of the greatest moments in Raw, because it wasn't revealed yet that Stephanie had bought ECW.
Yeah.
Paul E. suddenly forms the ECW faction, which had, by and large, way more talent in it than the WCW camp. I mean, you're talking the Dudleys, Sandman.
Well, Sandman wasn't in yet. He came in later on.
Did he come in later on?
Yeah, he was a part. But Rob Van Dam, who, in my opinion, probably the most talented guy they acquired during the whole invasion era.
Rhino, which I think Rhino was one of the absolute best talents they ever had. And I don't think he got the run that he deserved.
Yeah.
You had Rhino.
Raven was already there.
Raven was there, but Raven went to the ECW camp.
Yeah.
You had Taz, who was already there, but he went to the ECW camp. And just, you brought out the old ECW guys, and ECW still carries its fan base to this day. I mean, you felt these guys. They were our blue-collar warriors, us against them. And it was, ECW could have stood so large on its own in that regard, but no, they had to beef up the WCW invasion angle because it wasn't going well. So they combine them, so it's 2-on-1 against Vince. And lo and behold, you see the writing on the wall was there from the beginning, This is going to be booked by the end of it where Vince emerges victorious.
Yeah, and so many guys, like I said, it's such weighted where you have The Undertaker and you have Big Show, you have Kane, Stone Cold, Kurt Angle, that they had to start pulling some WWF guys and be like, oh, well, we'll turn and we'll join the alliance. No, Christian did. Stone Cold Steve Austin did. He was the biggest name that went to the alliance.
Yeah, they had to do something because they were failing. And I felt bad for DDP and all this because DDP's big angle was he was stalking the Undertaker's wife. And anybody has never heard that, yeah. He was stalking Undertaker's then wife, Sarah. And that started his angle with Taker. And we all knew at the time, DDP was married to Kimberly. There was no reason to stalk Sarah.
Yeah. And Diamond Dallas Page had been one of the top good guys in WCW for several years.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, he was a huge babyface for them. Everybody cheered for him because he was this just blue-collar guy from Jersey.
Got a late start in his career.
Yeah, 35 years old when he's having his first match.
That's unheard of.
Yeah, that couldn't be done today.
No.
At all. And at the time, it really shouldn't have happened then either, but he had enough heart to go in and do it and say, forget everyone else, forget all the negativity, I'm doing this. And he comes into the WWE and it became I was a big fish in one place, but this is a much bigger pond. I just jumped into the ocean.
Yeah. And in a bad story with The Undertaker.
Yeah, the story was bad from the get-go. I mean, there was just no hope for that whatsoever, and not even Taker. And, everybody gets a rub off Taker. If you run a good angle with that man, you are golden, but that storyline was so bad that no one could have escaped it.
But systematically, it's almost like they just... Booker T just sort of, at SummerSlam, he would lose his WCW title to The Rock. I mean, just almost point by point, every single person on there was lowered to the WWF guys.
Yeah, and that was, I think, Vince's intent all the time, because there's no way he was going to let the product that he worked years to beat him when he's booking this. And that's where he went wrong. I think his own ego got the best of him on this. The writing was on the wall that by the end, WWE was going to be booked to win. There was no good way to look at it.
Yeah. But it's sad. At the end of this, it goes on from... There's an Invasion pay-per-view in July, and we go all the way through SummerSlam, ends at Survivor Series, and it got so convoluted that Team Alliance, by the time it was done, 3 of the 5 members of the Alliance were WWF employees before it. The only 2 members of that team that were from ECW or WCW were Rob Van Dam and Booker T. That's how bad it got.
It got horrible. I mean, I've seen better booking on some indie Invasion shows. Because at least there was a plan front to back. It felt like they came up with a halfway cocked plan with B-list guys and realized it wasn't working because they had no star power. And at that point, it was just too far gone, so they started booking on the fly, trying to get traction, and it wouldn't work. So finally they were like, you know what, we're going to scrap this at Survivor Series.
I think it originally was supposed to go on to WrestleMania, I would assume.
I would have assumed the same thing, because WrestleMania is your blow-off. That's the night of champions, the night that stars are made, moments are had, it's your biggest show of the year, you're in the biggest arena of the year, because that's where, by that point, WrestleMania 17 was the return to the giant venue.
Yes.
And that was the return to the Astrodome, which I was there. And I'm going to tell you something. 68,000 people was something to behold. Not only in the parking lot, but in the Astrodome itself. And that night felt like magic. It was awesome. And I could feel how special everything was. And they need that once a year. They need the big arena event. So it would have been perfect to run the Invasion angle up to the next WrestleMania. You go to 18 and have it giant wherever.
So do you think the plan initially... Okay, then the month after Survivor Series, the Invasion angle's over, they did a Undisputed Championship, the WCW Championship, and the WWF Championship
And that's when
to
Jericho
combine
won.
them. Do you think that was supposed to be at WrestleMania 18?
Yeah,
I think so too.
I do think so too. Now, the way they combine the titles, I think they put it on the right guy. They put it on Jericho.
Oh no, because nobody expected it.
Yeah. Well, not only nobody expected it, but Jericho deserved it.
Oh, definitely.
Now, I'd love to have seen that for Jericho at Mania, but there's also a problem with that is, WWE has been and will always be a babyface territory. In the end, they're going to push and push and push.
It's your Hulk Hogan's and your Stone Colds and your John Cena's that get all the recognition.
Right, so there's no way Jericho would have gone over as a heel at Mania to win the Undisputed title.
Yeah, that's true. It would have been Rock or Stone Cold, I would think.
Yeah, it would have been Rock or Stone Cold or maybe a relatively new guy, because you do have those great moments, your Benoit moment, your Guerrero moment, your Daniel Bryan moment, where you have the true underdog who's been working, sacrificing to get that championship. And that would have been cool to have a relative unknown to come on top like that. But when you're talking about the first Undisputed Championship, you really got to go with a name. And Jericho is the right guy for it in the long run, but they wouldn't, no way they would have done it Mania. So, Josh, let's jump to the point.
Yep. All right.
What would we have done?
I would have opened the purse strings to acquire bigger names.
Now, here's my problem with that. They were already making money. Your Hall, Nash, Hogan, Sting, Flair. They're already making money. They don't need to go on the road.
Well, no, they don't.
They didn't. So they could have sat home, rested their bodies, drank, and continued to earn millions of dollars until the contract was up. So there's no way they were going to leave what they were doing.
But they did shortly thereafter the invasion. Ric Flair debuted the night after the invasion. Dustin Rhodes, Goldust, came back in December of that year. And then in February, they get Hogan, Nash, and Scott Hall.
Right, but it had to be until their contract was up. So when the invasion angle started, their contracts weren't up yet.
Yeah, they chose. So basically, the invasion angle would have to be strong enough to last until the contracts were up.
Right. So, the first thing I would have done, you're looking at Nash. The moment where Shane bought it out from Vince and we're having a simulcast, that's great. I would have gone with that, but I wouldn't have let my product cross paths. I would have been like, I'll see you down the road.
I wouldn't have brought Shane in as WCW owner. I would have had Eric Bischoff. Because he signed with the company in WWE at that point, July of the next year, July 2002.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was, I'm not sure his contract status when WCW closed. I'm thinking he had been fired again. But Eric Bischoff has a great screen presence.
He does, and because of his antics and everything, it was a huge coup when he came to WWF, because it's the one guy. I always figured Hall, Nash, and Hogan would show up. Goldberg would eventually show up. I never thought I would see Bischoff cross the line. I thought, Pride or Vince's Pride would have gotten too big for it, but Vince wanted his greatest adversary in the end to be under his thumb, and that's what he got.
Yeah, I never understood the logic of having Shane and Stephanie, because they're Vince's children, so therefore when he passed, they didn't inherit the company anyway, and WWF was a stronger brand than either WCW or ECW, so I never got the logic of why their characters would turn and try to be like, oh, we'll make this new alliance.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree to that, but it was at this whole same time. The reason Shane and Stephanie were originally introduced into TV was because at that time, talent was going back and forth, between WWF and ECW and WCW, and Vince was afraid of losing more talent. So in his top angle, he puts his own children into it because he knows they're not going any. And it's a smart move. They're not going to give him anytime soon, and he can trust his own family.
That's an old territory mindset. The Fritz von Erich did that down in Texas. Vern Gagne, he himself was champion of AWA. He promoted his son Greg Gagne.
Mm-hmm.
Down in Florida, it was Eddie Graham, his son Mike Graham.
Mm-hmm.
And then up in Calgary, Stu Hart and pretty much all his sons. So
Agreed.
It's a common mindset of promoters.
It is, and it was smart of Vince to do that at the time, but when the enemy is beaten, there wasn't really a need for it. But they had already become established faces, and I can understand the point of, hey, my children are ungrateful and they want to undermine me, so they're doing everything they can to destroy me, so they buy it. So I get that. But what I would have done from the start was Shane buys it, and then he says, I'll see you later, and starts his own programming. Takes over SmackDown and starts running ECW on a separate channel.
Or take over maybe even Sunday Night Heat's time slot.
Yeah. He could have taken over Sunday Night Heat's time slot and started raising his own talent into it. Now everybody's expecting the crossover, but you don't give it to him yet. You got to let the water boil. You have to let it simmer. Give these guys time.
And give them wins on television.
Yeah. And start hinting at a crossover here or down the road a little bit. Drop here, a drop there until the dam breaks. But you don't let that dam break until you are powerful enough. And I think they just wanted to really jump on the hot topic. But they didn't have the talent to do it.
They had some good young talent. That's who they should have built up. The Shane Helms, the Sean O'Hare. Mm-hmm. With time, they could have been bigger names.
With time, they could have been, but at the time, you still need your established star to come in and lead the charge. So we're looking at it. I would have definitely have just waited a bit, let the young guys start building up, start building their own angles. Just drop a hint here, some smack talking here from one side, verbal shot from the other, and we start letting it boil over a little bit. Let the water's boiling, let it start boiling over until we come to
when Ric Flair first came to WWF in '91, where you say he was the real world's champion.
Oh, that was a beautiful thing. They had to blur out the heavyweight title.
Yes, correct. Maybe the WCW champion could say that they're the real champion. WWF champion is not.
Yeah, and they could have definitely run with that championship angle and had a boil over. And then you have Invasion. You don't have it as a separate pay-per-view. You have it at WrestleMania. It would have been WrestleMania 18, the Invasion.
Yeah.
That's your blow-off. You don't need the Invasion pay-per-view and then SummerSlam and then whatever after that and accumulate it at Survivor Series because that's a waste.
It was 5 pay-per-views. It was July all the way through November.
And that's just a waste. You could have easily had let everything boil over and just finally have the crossover at WrestleMania. And that WrestleMania would have been huge. The buy rates would have been massive because that's what everybody's been waiting for a year now.
Well, I think what could help even heat that up at the WWF Royal Rumble before that, have WCW people interfere and try to screw up the Rumble.
Or you could have put it in them, increase the size of the Rumble from 30 to 40.
Do 20 WWF, 20 Alliance.
Yeah.
That could be interesting.
I mean, you could have very easily have done that. And, work the angle to who's going to... Of course, the purpose of the Rumble is to determine the number one contender for the heavyweight title. But if we're going into an invasion angle, then we're going to go title for title at Mania.
I'd have a WWF guy win and have their match at the February pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Or cash it in at Raw. I think John Cena at one point won the Rumble and did it before WrestleMania.
I think so. I think you might be right about that. And going into that, it could have been so much more, and I still would have gone title for title at Mania. Now, who would your champions be going into that?
If you keep it separate, it would either have to be Booker T or Diamond Dallas Page or Rob Van Dam. I would say probably Rob Van Dam.
I would have had some WWE guys who are currently under contract jump ship because you didn't have the star power there yet.
Yeah.
So in order to establish TV, I would have had a couple of guys jump ship to WCW programming to increase viewership. And you could have done that with The Rock. No.
Chris Jericho, former WCW talent. The Big Show.
Big Show, you could have done it with a number of guys that worked both sides. I probably would have put a WWE champion going in. I probably would have done Austin.
Actually, to think of it, in February 2002, the month before WrestleMania 18, that's when Hall, Nash, and Hogan came in. Hulk Hogan could have been your WCW champion.
Yeah, he could have. And if we wanted to redo it, because WrestleMania 18 had one of the most unexpectedly great matches that I'll be the first to admit. Hearing when this match was booked, I had every doubt because I thought it was going to be a total of 6 moves total, and the match was going to be over. And that match was The Rock versus Hogan.
And that blew that. I mean, the Skydome went nuts for those guys, especially Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, and Hogan and Rock, and they played it half. The beauty of that match that I loved so much is going into that match, Hogan was supposed to be, your big heel, Rock coming in as the big hero, but they felt out the crowd, and halfway through the match, they just decided to start turning things around. And when the big heat getters was Rock putting Hogan into the sharpshooter in Canada.
Yeah.
And that's a huge no. Only one man does the sharpshooter. And the crowd went nuts, and they started chanting for Hogan, and that match was better than anyone could have expected. It was an accumulation of eras. So, yeah, you could have easily have done Hogan as champion versus Rock as champion and had Rock go over.
And that would have made a huge match even more impressive.
Yeah, it really would have. And it would have given Hogan, one last run as a heavyweight champion. And The Rock had really come to his own. And at that time, also, Austin was very disgruntled by the only thing. In WrestleMania 18, he had that so-so match with Scott Hall.
Yeah, with Kevin Nash in Hall's corner.
Yeah. Which wasn't as cool as they had really hoped. They had hoped for so much more from that match, and I don't blame them. You had some mega star power in that match, but it just fell flat.
I think Hall also had personal problems because a few months later he was already gone.
And was that also the WrestleMania 18? Was that the match with Angle and Brock Lesnar?
No, that was 19. Lesnar debuted shortly thereafter, WrestleMania 18.
Lesnar was still in developmental with Cena.
Yeah, he debuted at Raw either the next night or the month later.
Yeah, so we taken that entire angle, had Hogan reappear in February.
I would have built that for months, where people didn't know who was coming. They could have expected Sting. It could have been Goldberg.
Yeah, it really could have. I mean, and you were sitting there now. This is all in the predication that there's going to be enough viewership for WCW to hold up its own TV. And that was the hard part. You would have had to have had WWE talent trickle over to fill the void. You know, Jericho would have had to have been one of those guys. And I think since Austin went heel right at 17, he would have been a good fit to go to WCW too.
So keep Rock as WWE on Raw, and then do Stone Cold on Nitro or whatever they decide to call it.
Yeah, because they had him jump ship to Alliance anyway, so why not have him, fully jump ship on TV?
And he was a bad guy, but he got really popular again with that whole what?
Yeah, the whole what thing. We have Austin to thank for that. But also, he did a lot of great comedy stuff between him, Vince, and Angle.
Yeah.
They had a lot of great comedic moments, and I really don't... I think Austin was happy doing the comedy, but he was not getting the kind of heel heat that he really wanted.
Yeah, he wanted to be more old school with it and be hated.
That's how he originally started in WWE, or at the time WWF. And he was doing some underhanded stuff. I mean, him and Bret Hart had a great run. Him and Brian Pillman. I mean, the famous gun in the house incident.
Oh, yeah, that they get in a lot of trouble with the USA Network.
A lot of trouble for putting a gun on live TV like that. USA took a lot of flack for that incident, but it was worth it in the end because it established, hey, you never know what's going to happen.
You'll never see that again, though.
Yeah, especially in this day and age. I mean, you can't even show up with a squirt gun on PG era. I mean, it's gotten that bad. But the invasion angle just had the potential for the greatest thing we had ever seen, something we had talked about when we were kids. If you put this guy against this guy, who's going to win? And it goes to that classic, we'll never see it because it'll never cross over. But sometimes dreams happen. When we were kids, we always kind of debated who would win the fight, Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah.
And we never thought that would happen, but lo and behold, that invasion did happen. And I actually think it went off better than the WWE's invasion.
True. Alien versus Predator probably ended up at the same level.
Yeah, I would go with Alien versus Predator was about the equivalent of the WWE, ECW, WCW invasion. Poor guys. I mean, so much talent, so much potential, but they just couldn't execute.
Do you think they could, if they were willing to open the purse strings, do you think they could have got a Goldberg earlier or a Sting?
No, I don't think so. I'm going to tell you why. Because they were making somewhere between $1 million and $3 million a year at that point, maybe more.
Under their WCW deals.
Yeah, under their Time Warner deals.
Oh, Time Warner deals, yeah.
And there's no reason to go back out on the road because WWF's schedule was ultra demanding, still is to this day. You're doing 300 shows a year, 300 nights on the road every year. It doesn't matter who you are, unless you're a special part-timer like Brock Lesnar or Undertaker.
Well, they didn't have those back then either.
No, they didn't.
Culture's kind of changed a little bit.
Culture's changed a little bit, but not that much. Like Cena is still pulling 300 nights a year.
Yeah, and Orton and most of the other guys. Daniel Bryan when he's healthy.
Yeah, Brian Punk was doing it.
Some guys like to work house shows. I know Dave Batista loves working house shows. He prefers house shows to television.
Well, you have a
Has
lot
more
more
fun.
leeway. Yeah, you have a lot more leeway to be a little goofy or try something new, and pressure's kind of off on those. And you can address the crowd and kind of eat up time. There's no real time constraint. There is, but not as much. And so, yeah, you can have a lot more fun doing that stuff. And I get it, but with their WCW contracts, even when they were on the road, they were only doing 120 a year as opposed to 300.
Yeah, they have a lot less dates.
Yeah, they had a lot less dates, so there was no way you were going to get Goldberg, Sting, Hogan, Nash, or Hall off their cushy, I'm going to earn $1 million while I'm sitting at home. There's really no reason for me to sign with Vince yet, because as soon as that contract runs out, I know he's going to want me.
Well,
It
comes down to passion too, though, because Diamond Dallas Page, I'm sure he had a large contract.
Not as large as those guys.
I know, but DDP realized he doesn't have much time left in the business. He's getting up there, but he had a passion for it too. I don't think Bill Goldberg does.
No, I don't think Goldberg does at all. I think and I always felt like Goldberg kind of looked down on wrestling because it wasn't what he wanted to do. Goldberg wanted to be a professional football player, which he was.
Goldberg was kind of like Lex Luger previously, as far as attitude.
I totally agree with you. They look down on it like this is secondary to who I really am, and these guys are beneath what I do, and so are these fans. And you can't do that in professional wrestling. You are in it because you love to be a professional wrestler.
And it's not just matches. I mean, it's just getting up in the morning, go to the next town, do that, get up, go to the next town, like constantly.
Yeah, there is no break. You have to eat, sleep, and breathe it. And there are a lot of successful guys in this day and age who are still like that. Triple H breathes the business, always has. That's all he's ever wanted in life.
Yeah, John Cena, same way. I know a lot of people don't like John Cena, but John Cena's passionate about professional wrestling.
Very much so. And a lot of guys, they are passionate about it, and then they figure out later in life that I'm still passionate about, but I'm passionate about other things, like The Rock. Yeah. The Rock is still incredibly passionate about professional wrestling. However, he also likes making movies and has discovered a new path in life.
Same with Chris Jericho doing his band Fozzy.
Yeah, Jericho always wanted to do two things in life, be a rock star or a professional wrestler. And he's at a point in his life where he gets to do both. So I don't think he actually has a home.
So the top names in WCW, it's pretty much, they're not as passionate as the top guys in WWF.
No, not at that time. And
at that time, yeah.
To their credit, they had been doing it for so long and had so much money at this point that there was no need. And it probably gave all their bodies a good break, too.
Yeah, I think Nash was still hurt because I don't think he was on the last couple WCW pay-per-views. Sid was hurt. I mean, he had the infamous broke his leg at the February pay-per-view, I think.
Yeah, if anybody listening has not seen the Sid Vicious leg break, please YouTube that, because that is one of the nastiest injuries in professional wrestling that I have ever seen.
I mean, it just snapped like a twig. And
right.
Sid is an imposing, he's 6'10", 300 pounds?
Yeah, big man.
Yeah, he did not.
His boot is hanging on him. I remember watching him like, what? He's bending at the knee. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That is not his knee. That's about a good half foot lower than where his knee is bending.
Here's a name we haven't discussed yet in the Invasion. If they could have got Macho Man Randy Savage.
At that point, I think Savage was persona non grata with Vince. Tales I've heard told, whereas Vince was very disappointed when Savage left.
Wait, Well, Vince wanted Savage to be a commentator, right?
Yeah, at first he wanted Savage to be a commentator and only wanted him working light whenever. And Savage, I think, came down to a contractual dispute and also something. I think something else happened. I'm not for sure, but Vince was very mad on how Randy handled everything, and Randy was very mad at Vince over how things were being handled, and it did not end well between the two of them. And
yeah, Randy still wanted to be a wrestler because he had a passion for it.
He did, and
he wasn't ready to go to pasture yet.
No, and to this day, Randy is still not in the Hall of Fame. One people horribly hate, but at the same time, Randy's brother Lenny will not sign off on Randy being inducted because Randy's wish was my entire family gets inducted or none of us do. You know, he wanted his father to be inducted, he wanted his brother to be inducted, which is great and very noble of him, and I get his angle, but at the same time, Randy was bigger than both of them, in my opinion.
Yeah. What's sad about Randy is I think they were working on the relationship because Savage was starting to promote WWE's 2012 game, I think. He was like a downloadable character. I know he was working with he did a commercial once.
Did he?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was 2012 version of the game. So it was sort of like they were trying to be like Ultimate Warrior, trying to do that, but he passed away, unfortunately, before he got his moment. But I mean, he would have been a huge name for it if they could have got him for WCW.
Yeah, he would have been. He certainly would have been, and that would have been a big grab for them and would have been helpful to promote WCW programming on its own because Randy was still a huge name at that time.
Everybody knows him from Slim Jim. Stop to Slim Jim. Oh, yeah.
Now, there was a lot of things that went wrong, and one of the biggest things was that we've mentioned it throughout this podcast, no name recognition with the stars that you had acquired, save for DDP, Booker T, and that's it. Everybody else was a B-plus player.
Yeah, when you're next in line, Buff Bagwell. Buff had a good look. That's about it.
That is definitely it. His subpar mic skills, even worse in-ring skills.
Under that, Lance Storm, Billy Kidman, good wrestlers. Very good wrestlers, but not very charismatic.
Yeah, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Lance Storm was one of the best talents to never truly make it huge.
Definitely. His biggest moment was probably he won 3 titles at once in WCW.
I think he did that, yeah. And you can add a lot of the ECW. I wouldn't have even started the ECW angle, to tell you the truth, because WCW versus WWE was big enough. I would have waited to the next year to do an ECW faction.
Or you could have the other show, the WCW show. Mm-hmm. That show featured WCW versus ECW. And have their own little battle going on, because those rosters, ECW probably had a little bit of an advantage, but they were more comparable than to what the WWF roster would have been.
True. And you definitely could have done that. But I still would have waited till the next year. I would have, had Paulie gather his troops probably the Monday night after WrestleMania 18. Because the Monday following WrestleMania is always a huge Raw.
Yeah, that's their biggest draw of the year, typically.
Yeah. So, and because you're kicking off new angles, you're going to start something huge at that point. So why not have Paulie, and that infamous scream, "Remember this night, JR, remember this night for the rest of your life." And close out the show, and you can have another year's worth of angle with Paul gathering his troops and becoming a huge faction. Left Stephanie out of it. Have Stephanie working on her own stuff.
Or build up the Dudley Boys could have had like the tag titles. RVD could have been Intercontinental Champion, which adds more power to Heyman's situation. If he has those guys on his roster and they've got gold with them, that makes them look even more credible.
Very true. And you could have also raised up the ECW title.
Yeah.
Very, very easy to do. And you could have gone, and accumulating while we're thinking about this, you're getting 2 years worth of an invasion angle.
As opposed to 5 months.
As opposed to 5 months. And they went for a quick burn that tasted bad instead of a long, slow burn that would have felt right and organic. And that was another thing. None of the invasion felt organic, save for the only part that felt real was Paulie.
Yeah.
Paulie felt real, and a lot of it was real for him because he was angry, still bitter at Vince. And one of the most famous promos he's ever done was his shoot promo on Vince, where it was, half a shoot, because the things he was saying, all of it held water.
Well, we'll explain why. Paul Heyman was the owner of ECW. ECW was on TNN, which is now Spike TV. And WWF was on USA Network. Well, their contract was coming up at USA Network. TNN had signed ECW for, I think, a 1-year deal. And basically used ECW as a test subject to see how professional wrestling would do on their network. The year ran out. WWF's contract with USA had run out. TNN dumped ECW, picked up WWF, and ECW was stranded, basically. I've seen interviews, they couldn't pick up their pay-per-view money until they ran another pay-per-view. A lot of their merchandise was tied into TV deals.
Very true. And Paulie shot for the moon because he thought, my promotion won't be solidified until I get a weekly national TV program. And there's a lot to be said for that. But ECW, at its core, great ECW, would never fall into any kind of cable programming like that. It would have to be on HBO or Cinemax to truly hold what ECW was truly about.
That would have been an interesting home for them at HBO or because this is before Game of Thrones, Sopranos.
Yeah, that's
HBO.
actually right around the time of Sopranos.
Yeah, but they were trying to change their image. That may have been an interesting fit for them because they still had boxing at that point, right?
Yeah, they still have boxing to this day, and they still have sports programming on there besides boxing. They do a lot of interviews. They have what am I trying to think of? The NFL show.
So, I mean, they could have put that on like midnight. I mean, I don't think ECW is that expensive to produce. You could have put a midnight Saturday show and get that cult following.
Yeah, you could have even done it like, I would have done it to oppose Vince. I would have put it on HBO, put it on 11:30 at midnight.
Yeah.
Or 11:30 midnight on Monday night.
True.
Right after Raw, because your wrestling fans are already up, and the hardcore wrestling fans know it's there.
And they'd subscribe to HBO. You'd be getting the new subscribers.
Yeah, and this was at a time before HBO Go.
Yeah.
You had to have HBO if you wanted to see this.
So,
and they wouldn't have had to do pay-per-views anymore because it's all on HBO.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's why Paul Heyman was furious with WWF and Vince McMahon. Another thing we haven't discussed is just the merchandising of, you would keep the rosters separate, but in the video games, you could have The Rock versus Booker T, or Stone Cold versus Diamond Dallas Page. You know, to build up that fantasy.
Yeah, and there were a lot of
I don't remember if you remember this, but there was a WCW game that came out for the N64, WCW versus NWO,
Yeah, I remember that.
which ran on the same engine as what was
WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy.
No Mercy? Yeah, ran on the same engine as No Mercy, and it was a really good video game for its time. But it also gave you that feel like these were two warring factions,
Yeah.
and the only way we're going to get this is on a video game. I mean, there's so much merchandising you could have done within this 2 years that we have now mapped out, where we're going to get 2 years worth of angles. Now, of course, booking always changes due to injury, due to talent acquisition, and due to public feel. Because sometimes, and this is what they encountered, was what they were trying to do didn't feel out. And that was because, and we keep saying it, when it keeps coming back, lack of star power.
Which in wrestling, that's everything.
It is. If you don't have the people behind you, you don't have the star, then you have nothing.
It's more like the NBA, where it relies on the Michael Jordans, rather than the NFL, where it's just the teams.
Yeah. And that is very true, because more people will tune in to see a Cleveland Cavaliers game because of LeBron James.
Yeah.
As opposed to turning to see the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Exactly. Whereas the NFL, it's the team. The players can come and go. People don't care as much. You know.
It really is, unless you're Peyton Manning.
Oh, yeah.
Because then you're watching Peyton Manning be Peyton Manning, but that's for another day.
That's a few exceptions, though.
Mm-hmm. That exception is incredibly few and far between, because I don't turn on the Steelers game just to watch Ben Roethlisberger, just to watch James Harrison. I turn it on to watch the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Exactly, like if Roethlisberger was traded, right, the Steelers would still be your team.
Yeah, no matter what. I mean, yeah, I'm going to be with Brian Leftwich. Or, God, I don't even know who they have backing up Leftwich now.
But like wrestling, like a lot of fans that were of Hulk Hogan they went to watch WCW instead of WWF because they were Hulk Hogan fans.
Yeah, I mean the Stars jumped ship, and a lot of WCW fans jumped ship to the WWE in the early '90s because Flair jumped.
Yeah,
and that was another angle that fell flat. You acquired the greatest talent that WCW had, and you failed to market him against the greatest talent you had.
And they were opposite. Like, Ric Flair was a bad guy. Hulk Hogan was a good guy. I mean, that was a perfect fit.
And when I heard that Vince wanted to let it slow burn and wanted to wait a year, unfortunately, that was a bad move because Flair went back.
Yeah. Do you know why Flair went back? Because he always slams WCW, says he hates the experience there. But he was only in WWF for, a year and a half?
Year and a half, if that. And I have no idea why he went back. It may have been a money issue, or it might have been a working issue, so many dates a year.
No, it wasn't used to. Well, NWA, he was working probably 300 days a year.
Yeah, but when it became WCW, I think they really did cut down on the time. They had one TV taping and maybe one or two house shows that week, and that was it.
Yeah.
And WCW didn't really venture that much at that time beyond the East Coast and the South.
Yeah, they're typically a southern based, because they come out of Jim Crockett Productions out of Atlanta, right?
Very true. Came out of Jim Crockett when Turner bought it, and Turner was trying to generally keep it in that area. It's when Bischoff took over everything that they started moving about. The big first Nitro was at the Mall of America.
Yeah, and they had survived doing TV taped at Orlando.
Orlando at Universal, using a theme park and wrestling being part of the attraction, which a novel idea in theory, but it just didn't work out.
TNA's still doing that. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Well, actually, they don't have any new tapings right now. So
Until last week, I thought TNA was still taping out of the asylum. That shows you how much I pay attention to TNA.
Yeah, they're another story.
And here's something else that WCW really didn't have that WWE had really captured during the Attitude Era was the female wrestler. Because coming into this invasion, you had women like Tori and Stacy Keibler on WCW side, but when it came to the WWE side, you had women like Lita and Trish Stratus who were really coming into their own.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Tori or Stacy were wrestlers.
No.
They were models that They were models that became wrestling characters more so than being wrestlers.
Very true. They were the early incarnation of that horrible stretch for WWE, where after Lita and Stacy and everybody who was there left, and you kind of had this new influx of divas who were models and couldn't work to save their lives.
Like Maurice and
tons of them. It was bad.
It was just like they did the Divas search, and it was just the turnover was ridiculous.
It was ridiculously bad, and now they're starting to get away from that. We've now currently have Paige, AJ, Natalia, and a lot of other great females that are coming into their own. Charlotte will be on TV soon. Nature's little girl.
Charlotte Flair. But
and those girls could work.
Yeah.
Watching Paige and AJ, last pay-per-view we watched, Paige and AJ were on point. Best match of the night, hands down, in my opinion.
Yeah, Hell in the Cell.
That was actually better than Hell in the Cell, because Hell in the Cell was good.
Well, just at the Hell in the Cell show.
At the Hell in the Cell show, I thought it was the best match, hands down. Looking from a technical standpoint, there were no gimmicks. It was just a wrestling match.
But going back to the invasion, what really got me, WCW typically did not build many stars of their own. They built DDP and Goldberg, and even Sting came from NWA, so that came even before WCW. So basically DDP and Goldberg. WWF had a reputation of building stars, taking stunning Steve Austin, letting him become Stone Cold Steve Austin. Right?
Right, and that was kind of an argument that in the famous Paul E. Shoots on Vince promo, Paul E. said, when you were serving us the gobbledygooker, Austin was in ECW cracking open his first beer.
But when WCW guys came to WWF, hardly any of them had any character development. Shane Helms being an exception, he became the Hurricane, and that became popular. But a lot of the characters didn't go anywhere. Like, I can't remember any memorable Billy Kidman moments, for instance, or any memorable Lance Storm moments, because they didn't do anything with their characters.
No, and you flooded, and that was the problem also, you flooded your TV with so many people. There's only a finite amount of time for stories and character development.
Yeah, and then people, they assume that everybody watched WCW, but WCW had fallen so far in the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of the WWF audience had no clue who Lance Storm was.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have no clue who Rob Van Dam was,
Agreed, and they had no character development, and that's where we go to the point of we needed separate TV to allow characters to be built.
personalities to be flushed.
And then get to the invasion or war, between WCW and WWF.
Because then you have a year to build everything, and so by the time the new year starts, you can start the invasion around January in the Rumble and have it accumulate at WrestleMania.
And make huge money.
And make a massive amount of money, merchandising, everything. I mean, it would have been huge. But
at their peak, WCW and WWF were pulling in large ratings. I'd say, around a 12, 13 maybe combined? And to the point where a product now is like, Raw gets like a 3.
Like 3.5, 4. And I think at one of its highest, it was like 8.5.
Yeah, just on its own, not including whatever WCW was doing.
Yeah.
So those fans are out there, and this invasion angle went so poorly that they've lost 3/4 of their audience. I mean, fans have moved on to UFC or something else.
Yeah, I mean, they've just kind of, fans grow up and they will move on to whatever else, and it's the fact that wrestling isn't cool anymore.
Yeah.
And that was something else. There's no cool factor now, so, and a lot of that was lost right when the invasion angle things started dropping. The Attitude Era was over. After 17, a lot of people consider WrestleMania 17 the closure of the Attitude Era, and then you turn into the Ruthless Aggression Era.
Which was like, the matches were as violent, but the content wasn't as risque.
It wasn't as risque, and you had a lot of your talent pool needed to be flushed out. Characters needed to be fleshed out. And that unfortunately happened to a lot of guys from both sides, from WWF, WCW. A lot of people got cut because they just couldn't hang. There was only so much room in the locker room.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that came in with a big name, like Scott Steiner was huge towards the end of WCW, came to WWE later on after the invasion, and floundered.
Yeah. And given if they had their own TV show, he may have been successful. I don't think he personally would be, but I've never been a Scott Steiner fan.
And they could see how they handled WCW talent well, which was Sting's biggest reason for not going WWE.
Yeah, he didn't want his legacy tarnished.
So if they were doing well, getting guys over, building people up, he probably would have eventually came over.
Very possible. Very possible, especially if they'd be like, hey, we're going to give you your own TV spot. You're going to be huge. You'll be the number one guy. Unfortunately, that was another thing that a lot of Paul and Nash and Hogan had creative control, which led to the downfall of WCW. They wouldn't have had that anymore.
Yeah.
Workers in your locker room should never have creative control. You're a paid hand, so you do what you're paid to do.
Yeah, that's WCW. That's one of the reasons they went out of business, because they did not have that. They had too many chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah, pretty much. And anybody could, if you were a big enough star, you could turn down whatever. If you were Goldberg and you don't like the way Jericho's doing things, you can just turn down every idea because you have creative control.
And guys would get over on their own. Eddie Guerrero was a hot heel at one point on his own. They squashed him. Chris Jericho, same thing. They squashed him. And that's sadly what's happening in WWE now. When you guys got guys like Zack Ryder trying to get over on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And the company doesn't want it to happen, so they're squashing people. It's like they're becoming WCW in a way.
A little bit is. We're seeing a lot of that where they're kind of self-destructing little by little from the inside because of these things. And unfortunately, I think we failed to mention this at the beginning of the invasion angle. Benoit was hurt.
Yeah, Triple H was hurt.
Triple H was hurt. Guerrero was hurt.
He's in rehab, but Dean Malenko just retired.
Yeah, and I think you could have talked Malenko out of retirement for a few months, and they would have been in great position to go into the WCW TV spot and help start running it, especially at that time.
Yeah.
So if you had waited and been able to stretch it out, they would have healed up.
And they had some other good guys behind the scenes, WCW. Arn Anderson, Double A, Dusty Rhodes, behind the scenes to help bolster their roster to teach these guys.
They would have been good to teach these guys and at the same time help being road agents. And also you can put them on TV doing something. I mean, Double A was always a good personality to have around. Same thing as Dusty. They still to this day, have name recognition. And that was even proven at the WWE Hall of Fame ceremony where Lita called out Arn for helping introduce her to Rey Mysterio Jr.
Yeah.
She was first trying to break in. Double A got a huge pop.
He got a huge pop at WrestleMania 17 that you were there when he hit the spine buster on the Undertaker.
That wasn't 17. That was 16.
He wasn't 17. He wasn't at 16. Undertaker was hurt that year.
Oh.
He had the match with Ric Flair.
Yeah, that was not 17. 17, Flair and Triple H. I'm not Flair. I'm sorry, Taker and Triple H.
Okay, I mixed up. My bad. Yeah, you're right. It was 18. Undertaker and Flair.
Yeah,
that was a good match. That was a forgotten match.
That was a really good match. I took a lot of heat from that from a lot of my friends for continuing to cheer on the Undertaker in the face of Flair, but Taker's always been my guy.
Yeah.
And we have rambled on here for about an hour and a half.
That's all right. This podcast, it's unlimited. We'll keep going. We'll keep going till we run tattoo shops.
Oh, Lord.
In hell.
In hell.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
I was just going to say, we have really fleshed out what we would have done differently. And we would have ran this angle for 2 years.
Yeah.
And it easily continued on like that, where every year you had a Super Bowl. It doesn't necessarily have to be at WrestleMania, but maybe two years after down the road you develop a pay-per-view, say in June or whenever, one of the forgotten pay-per-views that nobody really cares about anymore.
Yeah.
Where you have a Super Bowl accumulation of the two.
And along the way on that 2-year journey, you could introduce. There'd be guys added along the way that were added to WWE later, like Rey Mysterio.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the cruiserweights came later. Juventud, Super Crazy, guys like Scott Steiner.
You may have been able to get Conan back.
Yeah.
And Conan never jumped ship.
Goldberg.
Yeah, there was another thing. A lot of people wanted Goldberg in there. Personally, I didn't. I could have cared less about Goldberg. But the fact of the matter is, Goldberg had an immense amount of popularity.
Oh, definitely. He rivaled Stone Cold at points.
At points, yes, but unfortunately, Goldberg, his own ego, refused to evolve his character.
Well, that and he couldn't wrestle as well as Stone Cold. Stone Cold had been around for a while.
Yeah, Stone Cold knows how to wrestle. Goldberg really doesn't. And there was a lot of times where Goldberg got humiliated because he doesn't know how to work properly.
Yeah, I think William Regal kind of humbled him.
If any of y'all listening have never seen the Regal Goldberg match, I beg you to research and find it. It is a classic of humiliation, just showing how bad Goldberg really was. But Goldberg refused to evolve, and that's when his character really became stale in WCW, and people were starting to see right through it.
They tried to turn him bad, and at that point, nobody even cared anymore.
Nope, not one soul cared, because it was too little too late. And that was also at a point where WCW was really on the downfall. They had lost so much in viewership because of the crazy stuff. They were just trying to throw everything at the wall, trying to play catch up with WWF. They'd done their own hardcore title. If you remember the hardcore brawl that WCW had, where it was out in the middle of a junkyard.
Oh, they spent like $100,000 or something like that, and it looked like total garbage.
Yeah, and there was also David Arquette winning the world title to placate their movie, Ready to Rumble, which Ready to Rumble, fun movie. You're not going to find another wrestling movie about wrestling marks, and that's just not going to happen. But it didn't need to be brought into TV where you're having David Arquette go over and win the world title.
Yeah, they just made so many bad decisions. For instance, Bret Hart was their world champion, get injured by Goldberg, so his doctor says, hey, I need to take it easy for a while. So they book him in a hardcore match with Terry Funk. Needless to say, right after they had to retire. I mean, it's to the point where not only are they just booking stupid, they're booking dangerous.
And there was one guy, had what happened to him not have happened, it would have been the perfect spot for the invasion.
Oh, Bret Hart?
Bret Hart.
Oh, definitely.
That would have been so great where, if Bret was healthy and he hadn't gotten mule kicked in the head by Goldberg, and then consequently, unfortunately, later had a stroke, that invasion angle would have been so hot with Bret Hart leading the charge against Vince. And I can feel thinking about the promo that Bret would have been able to cut on Vince.
Oh, yeah, and they have a double main event. You have the world title versus world title. You could do Bret versus Vince right underneath that.
Yeah, you could have. And, they would have been so hot for each other because the sting from the Montreal Screwjob was still there.
And also Owen Hart's death.
And Owen's death, which that may have kept Bret from coming back. Because that took a long time to patch that up.
Yeah.
And
to clarify, I don't mean that Owen's death should have been part of the angle, because that's just tasteless.
That is tasteless.
I was just describing why Bret was gone. Another reason that he may not come back.
He might not have come back because of that reason. It would have been because his family was still arguing about, like, their family members that he doesn't talk to this day because he made up with Vince. Or so I'm told.
Yeah, but that would have been red hot, though.
Yeah.
You could have had a bunch of disgruntled guys and just put them on the mic and make money. Shane Douglas, before mentioned Macho Man.
Mm-hmm.
Even guys like Jeff Jarrett, Lex Luger, Conan.
A lot of those guys were also persona non grata by Vince. Vince would have brought Bret back in a heartbeat.
Yeah, because he loved Bret Hart. And I think Bret Hart loved Vince at one point.
Yeah, and he knows he screwed Bret. He knows it in his heart that he did it, but he did what he had to do. At least in his mind, he did what he had to do.
Yeah, and that was another wasted WCW moment.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, his first appearance was at Starrcade as a surprise referee to get Sting the title from Hogan.
How could you not run a Bret Hart versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan story? I mean,
it was kind of beyond me at that point, and Vince was right when he said to Bret, WCW will not know what to do with a Bret Hart. And he was right.
Yeah,
they didn't know what to do with him.
And by the time they started figuring it out, it's too late because with Goldberg got hurt.
Yeah. He gets mule kicked, and he hadn't had a good angle since. It was a complete waste of Bret. But had things been differently and Bret not become injured and then had a stroke, he would have had one of the hottest invasion angles of all time. And you could have saved it for right around January that year where Bret just shows up and he's like, all right, you guys are angry? Well, let's take the war to them.
And do it, even do it in like Calgary.
Oh, yeah.
Where you know you're going to get an insane reaction.
Oh, the reaction would have been so loud, I think a building would have literally shook. Bret's a treasure up there. Canada doesn't have many national treasures except for your Wayne Gretzky and Bret Hart.
And WrestleMania 18 took place Toronto, Ontario.
Yep, it would have been a good accumulation. It would have been on point, and at that point, HBK was gone.
Yeah, he was out till 2002.
Yeah,
he dealt with some back problems, some drug-related problems, temporary retirement, which everybody thought was permanent. I never thought he'd be back.
Me neither, honestly. I'm glad he did because HBK really did have a good run after that.
He saved his legacy. He really did.
He did. He really did. He came back and he was like, I'm a changed man. No more drugs. I'm going to church every day. I'm trying to be straight. And now he's a mountain man who does a lot of hunting and fishing, apparently.
That's his own TV show, I think.
He does have a hunting TV show, something I never thought I would see out of the Sexy Boy, but...
Doing strip teases back in the day.
Strip cheeses and stuffing kielbasa down his trunks. Or a sock and jumping up in Jim Ross's face. Like, by the way, after this, I'm going to go kill a deer.
Yeah, at least from Texas, I guess it's coming back to him.
Yeah, he's from San Antonio, though. It's not like
not true. It's like shooting coyotes or something.
Yeah, Steve Austin was from the outskirts in Texas, small town living, Friday Night Lights and all that. Hunting comes natural off Steve Austin, not for your Shawn Michaels, but really off point. You wouldn't have had Shawn Michaels during the invasion, unfortunately.
Correct.
Which would have been really good to counteract if Bret Hart had shown up. You talk HBK into come back.
Yeah, that's money there too.
Yeah, it is. And I think they would have been able to put aside everything to make a big moment.
Oh, at that point, with that high of stakes, with as much money as they're making at this point, because the wrestling industry's been down ever since the invasion angles. That's been down for going on 12 years now.
Yeah, it's never gotten to where it used to be.
So it cost them, I would say, hundreds of millions of dollars in the last 12 years.
And it's not only that. There's also that problem without competition, you don't have the drive for innovation.
Where you don't run as fast if nobody's chasing you.
Right. They have no reason now to continuously improve except for trying to get their ratings up, but it's definitely not the same as when you're trying to get your ratings up. That's one thing, but when you're trying to do everything you can to survive, to win, that's a completely different ball game.
And the world's changed since then too. Look how much prevalent the internet's become. There's on-demand viewing. This stuff did not exist back in 1998 or 2001 when this happened.
Yeah, the internet was still, wasn't quite in its infancy, but I would say the internet was about a 7-year-old or 8-year-old at that point. We're still internet. At that point, internet was only by dial-up mostly. Few and far between had any cable connection.
No, hardly any. The only videos I remember were like the terrible real. Remember the little real video player
Oh yes,
that would
real.
play like a blocky, terrible image quality.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you
you're
don't know
just
how
like,
to try to download a picture of Trish Stratus at that point. I'm not ashamed to admit that.
sunny years before that.
Oh God, that was horrible. 56K or die.
28, I think, probably at that point. That was 95.
Yeah, it was horrible. It was line by line, like it was like a typewriter trying to place a picture on every single step.
And then the elephant in the room with that, along with the internet, became, somebody can just instantly go on Wikipedia and see that CM Punk's name is Phil Brooks. It killed a lot of the kayfabe magic.
Interesting fact about that. I remember when I was in 8th grade, I was at the library downtown, and I was looking at professional wrestling, because professional wrestling has always been something I've loved. And I found this book, and it was given biographies on every wrestler known. It was unlicensed, so it covered everybody in the country on both WCW and WWF, but had their real bios in there.
Because before this, when we were kids, we didn't know Hulk Hogan's name was Terry Bollea. We thought he was Hulk Hogan, or at least Hogan was his name.
Yeah, I learned that Sting's name was Steve Borden. I was like, Sting does have a real name. This is amazing.
Because, I mean, before that stuff came, I think there were dirt sheets and stuff. I never bought dirt sheet magazines, so I didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't either. And also in that book, I figured out, Undertaker's real name was Mark Calloway.
Yeah.
And that he had worked in WCW before as Mark Callis.
Yeah, Mark Callis.
Yeah, that's something I never knew because I never watched it growing up. I watched WWF. And as far as I knew, he was always The Undertaker. The guy was literally always from Death Valley to me.
And back then, they didn't acknowledge that Wrestler A used to work for the competition.
Nope.
Like, when Mankind first came to WWF, they
Mm-hmm.
never acknowledged he was Cactus Jack. Or when Goldust first came to WWF, they never acknowledged he was Dustin Rhodes.
No, they did not. And there was more presence of secrecy and kayfabe, something that's long gone with the internet. And not only internet, but, TV's become a 24/7 thing. So Vince introduced also Tough Enough during this time.
Yeah, but reality programming was huge.
Yeah, and he wanted to keep up with reality TV, and there's something to be said for keeping up with the Jeffersons. But also, you lost a lot of your magic. Like, oh, anybody can do this.
Yeah.
Because that's what it ended up feeling like. And I know their purpose was to try to teach everybody not everybody can do this. But it failed in that execution because it still looked like anybody can try.
Yeah.
And you'll get in the ring and you'll meet superstars, and it's the same thing with American Idol and all that. Anybody can try out.
So do you think that the internet, just the availability of information, has hurt kayfabe more than Vince McMahon?
Yes, I do, because information was spread at that point. Even when WWE, or WWF at the time, I'm sorry, was doing Raw, one live, one tape,
Yeah.
every other week, I would amaze my friends because I would tell them exactly the matches that were going to happen on that night. Because I knew about internet dirt sheets. They didn't.
Yeah, and you knew the results beforehand.
Yeah, I would amaze them with my knowledge, and they would like, how did you do that? Like, magic.
And Eric Bischoff would actually, when he was commentator on Nitro, would read the results on the air.
Yes, he would.
Which I don't agree with.
No, but Bischoff was doing whatever he could to win.
And now I think it hurts SmackDown. SmackDown, is taped on Tuesdays, airs on Fridays. Anybody that wants to know what happens, then just look up on the internet.
Yes,
So
they can.
what's the incentive to watch? I think SmackDown needs to be live.
But then you're running 2 live shows and it becomes very much more expensive.
But I mean, there's to me, there's no incentive to watch it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't watch it either.
It's like when the Olympics are on tape delay, or they're in China or something, and then 16 hours later, NBC decides to show it. You know, even if it's a legitimate sport, if you know who's going to win, chances are you're probably not going to watch it.
Yeah, I'll totally agree with you on that.
I mean, if it's the NFL game, you're like, oh, you know, it happened last night. We're going to air it today. But you look up on the internet and see the score was 10-7. You're like, well, I don't need to watch that game.
Yeah, if I don't watch an NFL game live, I'm not watching it.
Exactly. Like, some people will tape games and stuff like that. It's just, that's not for me. I don't think it's for most people.
It's not, because ESPN will show me the highlights. The score is already going to be readily available to me anywhere I am. And the presence of information this day and age is so great. I can look up, backstage anything on my phone.
Yeah.
In my pocket. It's that easy now. So kayfabe has been ruined by the invention of the internet, but also it didn't help that Vince made it okay. It's tough enough.
Yeah.
He let everybody behind the curtain, and it got made to be okay.
And I don't think there's ever putting that genie back in that bottle.
No,
it's gone.
Yeah, there's no way. You would have to do a memory wipe on the population of the United States.
Like Men in Black, put the sunglasses on and hit the little...
Yeah, that's exactly what would have to happen, because that genie's not getting back in that bottle. It's too late. I mean, people knew that for years that professional wrestling was what it is, but you didn't really talk about it. But now everybody knows, and it's bad enough that it's not even the World Wrestling Federation.
Yeah, it's just WWE. They're not even entertainment. It's not even World Wrestling Entertainment anymore. It's just WWE.
I'm not in the wrestling business. I'm the entertainment business. I'm an entertainer. That became too wrestling to say I'm a wrestler, and
made wrestling a dirty word in Paul Heyman's promo.
It's not. Wrestling is a sport. And you are an athlete.
And also the media has always hated professional wrestling. Always.
That's true.
Like they like when Chris Benoit tragedy happened, they were salivating at the idea that they could make wrestling look horrible. The same thing happened during the steroid trials in the early 90s. Like anything that they can make wrestling look bad, they do it.
I agree with you. And there's no more putting the genie back in the bottle. We're at a point where after the invasion angle, everything just kind of broke apart.
I think eventually with the internet it would have happened, but I think if the invasion angle was successful, it would have been on life support a little bit longer.
It would have been, and you could have made the invasion angle feel so organic and cool that you could have been selling T-shirts, and there would have been the schoolyard arguments. Who's going to win in this fight? Well, it never happened because they're on separate TV. They're.
It's kind of like Marvel superheroes versus DC superheroes.
Yeah, we're never going to see. We've seen a crossover special here or there.
Yeah.
But they really don't acknowledge each other. They really don't have too much to say about one another, except when the time is right. A certain Justice League versus
the Avengers.
Yes, sorry, I got tongue-tied there for a second. Justice League versus Avengers, or X-Men, versus Justice League, whoever, you know.
That's what WWF versus WCW should have been.
It should have been, they barely acknowledge each other except when the time is specifically right.
Exactly.
You don't run your entire programming as an invasion from the get-go. Yeah, they wanted to burn fast and it tasted badly. Slow burn would have tasted much better.
Exactly. Well, we thank you for listening to our professional wrestling version of Hollywood. Like I said, it's the entertainment industry. Sometimes we'll go to comic books or television, not always motion pictures.
We're very versatile in the entertainment industry. We just happen to have a lot of opinions, and we always welcome yours. So in any comments, whether it be on iTunes, YouTube, please leave them. We will read them.
Yes, we will, and we'll see you next time on Hollywood. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day or night whenever you're listening.
Good night, everybody.